So I would like to just, welcome to the workshop. What is your survivor's agenda? And we are very proud and honored to have Flannery Houston, Joellen Chernow, Denise Beek, and Natalie Mayuze sharing the insights and vision of Bold Moves. And now it's up to our presenters. Natalie, will you be sharing your screen?
Yeah, thank you, Meghna. Let me just get that.
And Natalie, before you start, I just wanted to remind all our participants once again to please switch off your video. It's so that folks can actually pin the ASL interpreter on their screen. So we just appreciate everybody. Thank you so much. If you're not the active speaker, thank you.
Cool, so thank you all for coming. Welcome to our workshop, What's Your Agenda? Building Survivor Power Across Movement. Denise, if you want to start.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to start off by thanking the organizers that planned the National Sexual Assault Conference. Thank you to Meghna, thank you to the ASL interpreters, and thank you to CalCASA. My name is Denise Beek. I use pronouns she and her. I am the Chief Communications Officer for Me Too International. Me Too is an organization that has centered survivors and continues to center survivors in the movement to end sexual violence through healing and transformation. And it is, again, an honor to be here.
Great, I'll go next. My name is Flannery Houston. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Director of Programs for RISE, which is a survivor-led nonprofit that helps survivors of sexual assault pen their own rights into existence. We have passed the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights in 26 states so far, including 3 states in 2020 during the pandemic. So want to say again, thank you to everyone involved. Thank you for everyone who is participating in this event. And thank you to CalCASA and everybody who's hosting.
Hi, my name is Joellen Chernow. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the co-founder and co-director of Survivors Know. We're a new nonprofit member-based organization, really committed to the leadership of survivors and ending sexual violence and harassment. We believe that sexual violence and sexual harassment is a collective harm that calls on us to take collective action. And I'd like to echo just gratitude for the conveners of this amazing conference and to my fellow facilitators here. It's been a real pleasure working with them.
Likewise, on my end, my name is Natalie Mayuze. I am the Outreach and Policy Associate for Futures Without Violence, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Futures Without Violence is a national advocacy organization that's dedicated towards working to end violence against women and children internationally. We are also key organizers in passing the 1994 Violence Against Women Act. But again, thank you all for coming to this space. Just to get us started, we thought we'd like to center us all and remind everyone why we're here and what we're here about with a quote from Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, which is also one of the steering orgs for the Survivors Agenda, who said on a call in June for Survivors Agenda, survivors are a constituency. We are a power base and inherently in survival as power, and we're just here to exercise that power. To invite you all to the space, we have a couple of questions that we'd love for you guys to answer in the chat. Number 1 being, what are your hopes for the survivor movement? And number 2, what is your vision for change in your town, cities, or communities? Please write your response in the chat. And to give you guys time to process and respond, we'll share what our visions are. For myself, I come from a very rural town in a very rural state that has the highest rates of domestic and sexual violence. So my vision for change is comprehensive sex and healthy relationship education from early ages.
I'm happy to go. Thank you, Natalie, for kicking us off. My hopes for the survivor movement is that it continues to be survivor-centered and survivor-led. And my vision for change, I currently live in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is known for having a very vibrant activist community. And my vision for change is that Philadelphia continues to work across silos and sectors in education and policy and law to end sex trafficking, which is a major issue in the city of Philadelphia. Flannery?
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie, for kicking us off. I am coming to you right now from Palm Springs, California, but I live in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And like Denise, we are known for having a very vibrant community of activists and for being very progressive. And my survivors agenda is to see that progressivism, that activism continues to spread throughout the country in terms of ensuring that all survivors are protected under the letter of the law. And not only that, but so that we can live within our communities free from fear or insecurity. I want all survivors to viscerally know that their rights are protected and that their communities stand with them and accept them for all their beauty and power. Over to you, Joellen.
Thanks, Flannery. My hope for the survivor movement and for survivors is that we place survivors' needs and hopes and dreams over those of really important, quote unquote, men, corporations, and institutions. And I live in Chicago, which is unseasonably really fallish today. And I'm super inspired by the youth here, and I hope that we follow their leadership and their bravery and irreverence in challenging power. And with that, I pass it back to Nathalie.
Thank you. Thank you guys for responding. I cannot see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but would one of you mind selecting a couple of responses to read out?
I'm happy to. It's moving so fast. Thank you guys for dropping. I was like, there was one that I really liked. Continuing to promote prevention and awareness of sexual assault. We are involved in upstander intervention, which I am so curious about. Community climate change regarding sexual assault and evidence-based treatment. And that's from Michelle in Salisbury, Ocean City, where I am currently on vacation. So hi, Michelle, thank you so much. And another comment from Deborah. My hope for my community is for local survivor leaders, including human trafficking survivors, to have influence and impact to create a community that is resistant to violence and trafficking. My community is Santa Cruz and Monterey counties in California. Thank you, Deborah.
There's also another one that I would love to highlight from Michael. He says, hopes for survivor movement. All voices are heard, valued, respected, and honored, especially trans voices, male voices, and folks with multiple intersecting identities. Thank you, Michael, for that.
Thank you. Thank you all for participating. And I hand it off to you, Denise.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, the chat is so beautiful. Okay, so, all right, I have to close that window so I don't get distracted. So what is the survivors' agenda? So as we know, 3 years ago, the world was kind of turned on its head as millions of people raised their hands to say Me Too. Survivors, many of us for the first time, shared stories of abuse and how we've navigated harm just to be able to live, work, and provide for our families. Not only are we still experiencing the ripple effects of that moment, of that cataclysmic moment, we are building momentum within the movement to interrupt sexual violence wherever it persists. The survivors' agenda is about joining power and changing the conversation, especially for those last seen and heard in our society. The survivors' agenda is a multiracial, community-led, community-driven guide towards survivor justice. It is an offering of love and healing for those who continue to navigate the trauma of sexual abuse, and a pathway for those seeking to prevent and interrupt sexual violence in their communities and for future generations. We know that those who have survived sexual violence are inherently powerful and resilient. We know what it means to arise out of struggle and face a new day. We also know that we are more than our trauma. We are family members, we are friends, we are co-workers, and we are leaders. We are a constituency that is organizing to affect change on a cultural, social, and political level. This agenda is about what we are calling for, what we will no longer stay silent about, and what we are organizing to create together. We are a collective of organizations and individuals who believe that survivors should be the ones shaping the national conversation on sexual violence. Because if we can change the conversation, we can change mainstream consciousness. We are moving forward a vision of survivor justice that precedes our work, and one that will continue for decades to come. Our specific work in this particular formation began late last year after the launch of Me Too Voter. Me Too Voter was a campaign that pushed to prioritize sexual violence on the presidential debate stage and on candidates' platforms. Nonprofit organizations, Me Too International, Justice for Migrant Women, National Women's Law Center, and National Domestic Workers Alliance sought out to produce a summit that centered survivors and their lived experiences by asking them what they want and what kind of change they would like to see. We officially launched the Survivors Agenda in May with just a call out, just to kind of gather information. And then we released our call for survey submissions in June by way of a national call. That call was attended by over 700 folks, and over the weekend that followed was viewed 10,000 times, which really was an indicator for us around how much this conversation is needed. The agenda to be shared at the summit is a crowdsourced platform built on our commitment to lay a foundation for future movement building, policy change, narrative shifts, and accountability efforts over the long term. At this time, I would like to honor those who have done this work before us, especially the Black, Indigenous, and survivors of color who have shown us the very meaning of resilience. As a steering committee of 21 organizations and more than 60 community partners across the country, we strive to center survivors first, to remain accountable to the diverse experiences of those who have endured sexual harassment, assault, and other forms of gender-based violence. Survivors are not a monolith, nor do we all agree on what needs to change and how to bring that change about. We are accountable to those who are often left out of the conversation on sexual violence, or who are not even given consideration as victims, much less as survivors. We believe in and value the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, queer, transgender, intersex, and gender non-binary folks, young folks, workers, immigrants, with or without legal protection, those who are disabled, those currently or formerly incarcerated, and other historically marginalized groups globally. It is our intention to remain in active conversation about how sexual violence is addressed within these communities, with the goal of seeking justice and mitigating further harm. And as many of us are survivors ourselves, we are also committed to supporting one another through the daily struggle of this work. So as I shared, we came together in this formation officially earlier this year after launching the Me Too Voter campaign. And of course, as you know, with 21 organizations across the country having to meet virtually, we felt it was paramount for us to establish some level of a framework and values. The values you can find on our website, that's survivorsagenda.org, but I would like to take a moment to just lift them up in this conversation. The Survivors Agenda initiative operates in accordance with the following values. Our work is survivor-centered and survivor-led, focused on strategies and tactics that support those harmed by sexual violence to survive, heal, and to take action in service of creating systemic change that interrupts disrupts, prevents, and ends sexual violence. We recognize that sexual violence is experienced by those of all gender identities, including cis and trans women and men, and gender non-conforming and non-binary folks. We center the voices and experiences of those most marginalized by the intersections of gender-based violence, white supremacy, and capitalism. We call out how imperialism, colonization, enslavement, casteism, and genocide have created conditions for assault and violence on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, queer, transgender, intersex, and gender non-binary folks, young folks, workers, immigrants with or without legal protections, those who are disabled, those currently or formerly and incarcerated, and other historically marginalized groups globally. We recognize that our solutions must reject the tenets of those interlocking oppressive systems and be visionary in how we understand radical transformation. We believe that change must come from institutional, interpersonal, policy, and cultural transformation that is driven and centered on survivor needs and demands. As a coalition, we are pursuing goals and strategies that represent the best and highest use of our collective engagement. We do not believe that sexual violence is made up of 4 committees. The Summit Planning Committee, that is actually the folks who are producing the summit that is taking place at the end of September. The Agenda Co-Creation Committee that has taken all of the responses from survivors since we launched the survey in June and has sat with the results along with a team of researchers that we'll get into in a moment, who have taken what survivors have said and are creating the preamble to an agenda that will be shared at the summit. We also have a communications committee that is in charge, of course, of raising the visibility of the survivors' agenda and working in lockstep with the other committees. And then, of course, our steering committee that kind of works to oversee all of the moving parts, and also the virtual engagement committee that has been responsible for creating all of the events leading up to and including the summit. So earlier in August, we had a town hall for Black femmes that was hosted by Tarana Burke, Angelica Ross, and Salamisha Tillett. And then earlier this week, we had a town hall for adult survivors of child sexual assault. And we will continue to encourage folks to have kitchen table conversations. On our website, you can find toolkits to having conversations within your community, and we look forward to hearing how those go. And with that, I will kick it to my comrades to talk about the research methodology.
Hi, Denise. Sorry to bother you. This is Meghna. Just wanted to request all our presenters to read a bit slowly, if that's possible, just for our ASL interpreters and our Spanish translators. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meghna.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Denise. So in that belief and commitment to everyone having a voice, the survivors survey was created that Denise was talking about previously. It's a brief 15-minute survey that sits on our website. You do not have to identify as a survivor in order to take it, just having previous experiences with sexual violence or harassment. And it's just a series of open-ended questions on arenas that are greatly impactful in a survivor's life, those being workplace, education, healthcare, housing, and community. And now in those questions, survivors are asked to choose their top 3 priorities, to say what we should not only emphasize, but is an immediate and pressing concern to survivors as a whole. All of these recommendations are compilations of what the suggestions of our steering and partner organizations are, which is around, I want to say 80 organizations. So it was very difficult to kind of compile all that down in the educational needs of survivors. Thank you, everyone. Okay, and let's go on to number 3.
Okay, number 3. What needs to change within the healthcare system to ensure that everyone can access services safely and without discrimination? Please select the top 3 changes that are most important to you. A, Strengthen and enforce laws that protect LGBTQI individuals from discrimination by healthcare providers. B, increase access to sexual health and reproductive care, including abortion, birth control, and emergency contraceptives. C, increase the number of trained sexual assault nurse examiners available at hospitals and healthcare providers, especially in rural and tribal areas. D, strengthen requirements that all healthcare providers to address and prevent practices that discriminate based on race, citizenship, or disability. E, ensure that all healthcare providers are trained to recognize the signs of abuse or human trafficking, are able to speak to survivors privately about sexual violence, and have the resources to provide trauma-informed services. And then F, of course, other. If you don't see other choices that you would have selected, please tell us what other changes you would like to see to make healthcare more accessible. Thanks, guys. I guess we covered all the bases. There are no other changes in the chat.
I'm waiting. We have 2% that said other. So. Well, that is part of the problem with us not being a monolith. And we say problem, you know, it's not actually one, but it's the fact that, like, despite how many options we could have gone into, like, Z or like double prime, but we wouldn't get everything that everyone wants to see.
That's right.
Maggie Schmidt says increase affordability of healthcare services related to the aftercare of sexual violence, including but not limited to physical and mental health service. Thank you, Maggie. That reminds me of, like, when I first started working in anti-violence spaces, I worked on a project where we had to talk to insurance providers to say, like, hey, you should be covering rape kits. Because, of course, no one wants to go through that process, but then to have to go through that process and then have it not covered by insurance, having to pay like hundreds of dollars in the United States for it, like, that's insane. That's insane. But of course, common sense is in short supply sometimes. Deborah Pembroke says medical professionals should screen for ACEs and integrate this into lifelong care. Addressing medical racism, thank you, Holly. And then the combination of some of the results as well. Yes, let's look at your guys' results. So number one that you guys all wanted was to ensure that all healthcare providers are trained to recognize the signs of abuse or human trafficking and are able to speak to survivors privately about sexual violence and have resources to provide trauma-informed services on the spot. And number two was to increase access to sexual health and reproductive care, including abortion, birth control, and emergency contraceptives. Thank you so much. Okay, on to the second to last question. What needs to change so that everyone has a safe living environment? Please select the top 3 changes that are most important to you. A, transitional housing units provide safe housing for up to 2 years for survivors of intimate partner violence, but there are not enough units to meet the current need. Increase the number of transitional housing units available to survivors. B, increase community investment in more safe and affordable housing to reduce the length of time someone needs to stay in emergency and transitional shelter. C, create programs that include childcare and transportation as part of housing services, especially in rural areas. D, make resources such as mental health support, social services, and crisis support available online or virtually accessible to survivors. E, provide comprehensive resources in shelters that care for survivors' mental health and that of their children, as well as their housing and financial needs. F, create programs that specifically address the housing needs of marginalized populations, including LGBTQI youth and survivors with disabilities. G, Strengthen and enforce existing housing protections to protect residents from sexual harassment by landlords and other residents, while ensuring landlords cannot use sexual or intimate partner violence as a reason for evicting survivors. And H, please tell us what other changes you would like to see in the chat. Okay, pop it over there now. Christian, says, not the question. However, as a survivor and mother, we need to honestly and openly educate our children around recognizing the signs and situations that could lead to sexual abuse. Teach them to use their voices and say out loud, no, don't touch me there, etc. Sunny says, more transitional from survivors of sexual violence, not just IPV. When we use sexual violence or intimate partner violence, it's normally a catch-all. It depends on the organization. We're sorry for excluding that. And Heidi says, all across the United States, we have a housing shortage. We need more housing that is affordable and safe. Okay, let's end the polling and see the results. Thank you, Magna. Top one was increasing community investment in more safe and affordable housing, which was followed actually quite closely by transitional housing units, well, increasing the number of transitional housing units available to survivors. Okay, and our final question.
Great. So the final question, what needs to change on the streets so that everyone can move through communities free from sexual violence? Again, please select the top 3 changes that are most important to you. A, prevention of sexual violence through addressing root causes, such as increasing employment opportunities, access to transportation, comprehensive harm reduction services for drug and alcohol abuse, and societal norms that support abuse of power and male superiority. B, family courts need to address racial disparities and work with community service providers to prevent sexual abuse of children while providing trauma-informed services to help survivors heal. C, develop or engage culturally rooted, community-based programs that allow the community to address the problems of sexual violence without police involvement, including mental health services, family and trauma-informed counseling, and social supports. D, greater accountability and stronger penalties for convicted offenders, including law enforcement. E, educate community members, schools, workplaces, and community agencies on trauma and the broad range of impacts of sexual violence on survivors, families, and communities. F, decriminalize and protect sex workers. G, other, please put in the chat.
Bouncing over to the chat, Lacey says law enforcement and judges need to be trained in sexual assault and domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
Danielle says, as a runner, I always worry about running by myself at night or too early in the morning. We need to address the root cause of that fear, which are those societal norms of power rather than pushing self-defense and accountability. i.e. always needing to tell someone when you go for a run, where you'll be going, etc. Michelle says, partner with local bars and high volume businesses about code word for sexual safety needs. Which really reminds me of, I very much am a young millennial. I am a product of the digital age. It's like when online dating kicked around, like you saw an explosion of a lot of bars having like safe words, for lack of a better term, where like you could go up and like order like an angel shot. I've seen a lot, where if you're on a Tinder date and it's not going well, but you don't know this person, so you're not about to, you know, try to say anything negative. So yeah, that is a strategy that is currently being used, but of course, violence is a never-ending issue. And then Holly says, defund and abolish law enforcement and the prison industrial complex who perpetuate sexual violence. Okay. Thank you, everyone. If we could look at the results of the poll. Cool. So it looks like number one was the development or engagement of culturally rooted community-based programs that allow the community to address the problems of sexual violence without police involvement, including mental health services, family and trauma-informed counseling, and social supports. And then number two, which is very close behind it, educate community members, schools, workplaces, and community agencies on trauma and the broad range of impacts of sexual violence on survivors, families, and communities. Okay. And let us now compare our results to the actual results of our survey. I'll highlight on just the top ones. Workplaces, survivors wanted to prohibit non-disclosure agreements. Education was the same as our results, comprehensive sex ed. Healthcare was the training of providers. Safe living, they wanted increased online and virtual accessibility of resources. In community, they also wanted to address the root causes of violence itself. Something I'll take the time to point out, community was the only one where one of the priorities had a tie. It was our second priority, which is stronger penalties in sentencing, and then also culturally rooted community programs. So the carceral and anti-carceral results currently has a 50-50 split in the community, or like the community that we at least have been able to capture. So that is often why, and is in fact why you have to increase community outreach. On our survey, the end section is like, hey, please self-identify your race, gender, sexuality, to see like what types of survivors are being represented by these results. And we saw that a fair majority of them are white. If a lot of your if a lot of your respondents are white, you're going to have a survey that has, you know, has a result where people want to have more police communities because white people on average tend to feel more comfortable with police. So that is something that Joellen's going to talk about a little bit deeper, but it's one of the very much like pendulums of like everyone needs to have a voice, but making sure that every single voice is actually being captured. It's not just every single voice that has 15 minutes in their day to sit down and take the survey. Shifting to look at the qualitative, because as we saw, as you guys experienced, these questions make you think a lot of things that you want to share. So survivors also left us comments. On institutional change, I only accepted that trauma was behind my chronic health issues 20 years into my health problems. I had not disclosed my childhood sexual abuse to doctors and probably have even denied it. Medical environments are usually not trauma-informed safe environments, which we know and survivors have told us is something that needs to be worked on. Shifting to healthcare. The nurse at the hospital blamed me for my assault, which made me not report. Nurses need to be trained on how to properly address these situations. And lastly, on vital resources, I held off on going to a therapist for a long time because I make poverty wages and had to pay out of pocket. We need better resources for people who might not have the means to pay for their own needed therapy. And turning now to Joellen.
Thanks, Nathalie. Thanks for everyone for the really robust comments too on the chat. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to read the problem statement draft on community safety that the 80 organizations developed in consultation with their bases as well. So many survivors choose not to or are unable to engage with the criminal legal system for very legitimate reasons, including its history and current practices, which are violent, especially towards Black people, people of color, LGBTQI, and immigrants, and other marginalized identities. As such, we must significantly invest beyond a system that is inadequate or counterproductive in providing all survivors the accountability, support, healing, and end to violence that they want. Sit with that for a second. And I think I'd like to share that, I come to this space like many of you as a survivor, as well as I had been for a couple of years a rape victim advocate in Chicago. And my experience, I think, is really unique with the criminal justice and court system. I was raped, and my dad had a close friend who was a head detective in Chicago, and he told the other detectives to treat me like one of their own. And because of that, my rape kit was tested within 10 days. He had already been in the system, and so was in jail within 2 weeks. There are countless untested rape kits in Chicago. There's literally no question why my case was fast-tracked. And he is now serving 30 years in prison. And I wrestle and acknowledge my real privilege and in that he is in prison, and also struggle with the fact that he is in prison. If he at some point does decide to embark on a process around really acknowledging the harm that he has done to myself and other survivors and to the community, and does the real work, I'd be open to thinking through that, what that could look like. But I think, what my experience brings up is this notion of empathy and privilege around empathy and relationships that is so problematic. We see it with politicians somehow then clutching their own daughters. Everyone has a daughter at that moment, right? And we don't need to have a daughter to have empathy around something, nor to have a more nuanced and thoughtful approach to what sexual violence and its impacts are. And then as a rape victim advocate, what I experienced at the hospital was often the police treating survivors like they were the problem. I overheard police, a young 12-year-old had been gang raped, and I overheard them saying that they didn't believe her. And when I advocated for her guardian to be in the room, they intimidated me. And I think as many of you are advocates and you're on the front lines, you experience this daily. We're quote unquote lucky to have a good police officer who's an advocate and who's coming from a place of acknowledging the pain that someone is experiencing. And I think that rather than chipping away at the current systems that weren't designed with those most impacted in mind, we need to imagine, along with survivors, what those alternatives could be. What does transformational accountability and justice really look like in our communities? And fundamentally, how do we address what brought this man to my car that evening? How do we address what it looked like I think it was the second question, right? What would it have looked like if he had been taught consent and respect? What would that have looked like? And so while he is in prison, you know, what has left me empty and what has strengthened my commitment to this work is really shifting these structures that are allowing so much of this abuse to be happening. So how do we, as a movement and as those on the front lines, create avenues for true transformation and accountability? So I think, you know, as Denise highlighted in the values document, that really is what holds us. How do we hold those most marginalized at the center of our work? How do we smash? And then I think it's holding the experiences of people at any point along in their journey of survivorship. And that can mean that they may not identify right now as a survivor, but holding that space and holding the space for people, understanding that this is not a linear journey, that this is very fluid. Building our power as survivors. You know, this includes people power and narrative power. And really encouraging, developing the leadership of survivors to be actively engaging in their own movement, local movement spaces, creating circles, survivor circles, engaging in national spaces just like these, and empowering them or providing the platform for them to do that. Taking a deeper dive into political education, understanding how power functions, how it touches our lives, and how do we organize for deep and lasting change. And then finally, and this is not finally, but again, this is how we start to center survivors, is through mutual aid. And I think we're thinking about mutual aid, and COVID has started to sort of shift this as creating opportunities for survivors to share their skills, their knowledge, their talents, their expertise, their experiences with one another in support of building a deep community and building structural change, not charity. You know, so that's what that looks like in terms of how we truly center survivors. I'd love to hear, and Flannery is going to talk a little bit more about this and dip in, but I don't know if Denise or Nathalie or Flannery, if anyone else wants to add anything to what I just shared.
No, thank you so much, Jo. Thank you for sharing. I know for me, I am obviously a Black woman. So like for me, when someone says like, hey, around 95% of those in like the tribal police will be abusers, will be people who had a past or are currently engaging in domestic violence. So for women like that, a safer police force is no police force. But it's like it's very hard like coming into a space where it's talking like, okay, our current solution to domestic violence is like putting people away behind bars or like having more cops. It's like it's constantly like weighing like each voice against each other and just like, you know, at the end of the day, like this is difficult. It's a difficult conversation. It was a difficult like survey, let alone, you know, like a difficult reality that many of us live in. It's like, how do we value everyone's voices equitably, but still get to marginalized populations? It's something that like we are trying to do as a collective, but I also appreciate like I've seen a lot of the different workshops for NSAC this year have been just about transformative justice because it is a current conversation that we're trying to have, and I love that we're trying to have it. And I also love being a part of survivor's agenda, where that was like one of our starting like formative things, was like, okay, where are we going with things like this? Here, let me get to Flannery's section.
Great. First off, I just want to say thank you, Joe, for sharing your experience. I know how difficult that can be to talk about it, and you know, you're in a safe space, and I'm just like really honored that you chose to share your experience with us and start off your really moving discussion with your narrative. And just to highlight what both Joe and Natalie said, you know, the organization that I work for, I actually started as a volunteer myself because I myself am also a survivor. And all of these other volunteers throughout the entire country who were either allies or survivors themselves, you tend to hear the same type of story over and over again. And that's one of two stories. One is either I didn't report my sexual assault to the police because I knew they wouldn't do anything, or I did report and they either intimidated me or made me feel like I needed to question if my experience actually happened or not, and if I was seeing it through the right lens. And if those are the stories that we're hearing so often, then that really shows that, you know, the system in place is not working for survivors. And, you know, like we've been saying, it's because the system is not necessarily survivor centered, and it's not, the conversation is not led by survivors saying, this is what we need. This is what we need from our leaders. This is what we need from our community to help us and to make us feel safe and to make us feel like we have been heard and we're accepted. So moving on from that, the question that we are you know, now considering is, what are the ways we can make sure that our work is truly survivor-led? And I feel like a lot of what we've been discussing throughout this entire session has been focused on figuring out what that is. As we mentioned, there are 20 or 21 organizations in the steering committee alone, which are a lot of really important voices. And then we have, you know, over 60 community partners helping us as well. And the most important way in which that we can make sure that this is a truly survivor-led moment and movement is to ensure that all survivors are actively participating through the survey, which can be found on our website. You've already seen some of the questions from the survey, but there's a whole lot more input that we want and need to make sure that this is the most successful agenda possible, and that we're really creating something new and important, and not only survivor-led, but something that will ensure that all survivors feel that they are part of this community. So as I mentioned, the community partners, we have over 60 community partners from all over. And we really rely on their partnerships to help us get the information out about Survivor's Agenda, everything that we're trying to accomplish leading up to the summit, as well as the summit itself. So they help us with the more local outreach through town halls, like Denise mentioned, and the kitchen table conversations. They help facilitate and guide these conversations in more intimate settings so that individuals feel heard and safe to express their opinions in a meaningful way. So they're really having these authentic conversations that Joe spoke of. So we've also created a helpful toolkit, which you can find on our website as well, which integrates the values that Denise spoke of earlier to facilitate these kitchen table conversations and engage with folks in a really healthy and inviting atmosphere. So you have that sense that survivors and the allies as well feel safe and they feel heard. And this toolkit also includes suggestions on how to create boundaries before the conversation actually happens. So you can create guidelines for the conversation itself. And we really encourage everybody to go check out this toolkit and to either participate or lead a kitchen table conversation yourself. And, you know, as Natalie and Joe discussed earlier, as we've seen, the majority of our survey responses have come from white women. And we all know that sexual violence does not impact only white women. And we want to make sure that all voices are heard and all survivors are represented in our agenda, but also throughout this movement and going forward, that all survivors know that they have a place and know that they are a part of this representation going forward. So with that being said, we know that we need more work done in communities, so we can ensure that all voices are heard and all voices feel comfortable coming forward and having these conversations. So I encourage you to go to our website, survivorsagenda.org, and fill out the full 15-minute survey and participate or lead a kitchen table conversation. With that, I will turn it back over to Natalie.
Thank you,
I also
Flannery.
just want to, yeah, thank you. I just want to also just echo again, even though the survey responses are currently being analyzed by our team of researchers, which was through a partnership with Brandeis that came by way of Anita Hill, which we're very, very honored to have. We still encourage you all to definitely respond to the survey, download the toolkit, and also if you do lead a kitchen table conversation, please use the report back form to let us know how it went. We're still going to be collecting this information and addressing it during the summit later this month. And I also just want to lift this comment that was made by Sarah from Boulder Advocacy, who says, I hope you will share the details of what you plan to do with this information or advocate for public policy change. The answer is yes. That is the goal. We are actually, full transparency, talking about this amongst the steering committee, what we want to do following the summit. You know, as we know, we are in the midst of an election year, quite a messy one. And so, you know, what can we do with the voices that we've heard through the survey? Do we want to make demands within, you know, for the first 100 days? Are we talking about local policy change? And so that's going to be up to the steering committee to decide, but this work is definitely just the beginning. So please, please, please go to the site and engage with all of the information and the ways to engage through all of the forms there.
I would say it's already having an impact just for like a steering organization perspective. I know, like, so I shared my organization, our founder, Esta, was one of the women who's very much instrumental in the passing of the 1994 VAWA, which we all know is incredibly carceral. So like our organization was built around carceral solutions to violence. But like our involvement in the survivors agenda, like physically having the voices of survivors in our screens, has forced us to have a conversation of where do we lie in the transformative to carceral space. Because while we may, you know, have a past history with this, we see it's not effective. And we also see that that's not what survivors want right now. So even if, you know, well, even though we still are developing conversations as to like what we want to do with this, we already know that it's having impact, which is fantastic, which is what you want. So. Oh, will do. Any other questions?
Should we go to the next slide while folks are maybe thinking about questions they want to ask, or? Yay. So on the website, you can find information, as we said, about all of the organizations who are involved, the 20 plus steering committee members, as well as the community partners that we're working with. There's also a wealth of information about what those organizations do. And then, of course, you can now register for the Survivors Summit, which is happening on September 24th. 25th and 26th. You can go to survivorsagenda.org/summit-registration to register. The full schedule will be announced at the end of next week. But for now, we've provided an overview where you can kind of see what the days will entail. Thursday will be Welcome to the Survivors Agenda, a plenary that will kind of talk about more of what we kind of talked about today. And then Friday will be breakout sessions that will be announced, like I said, next week. And then on Saturday, the rallying cry, where we will be talking more thoroughly about the results from the survey and our plans for next steps. Closed captioning and accessibility needs will be provided at no cost. And if you have any questions about the summit specifically, please do email us at info@survivorsagenda.org. There is a question in the chat from Deborah. Can you say more about kitchen table conversations? Would these be appropriate for rape crisis centers to hold these? I mean, I wouldn't say yes across the board for all rape crisis centers. I would say to take a look at the toolkit. I think that if you are confident that within your rape crisis center would be a safe space where folks can speak candidly about their experiences and their frustrations, and know that they will be held. And if you also maybe have someone or folks at the table who are also trauma informed, I would say by all means. They are intended to be intimate community conversations. Thank you, Flannery, for dropping the link to the toolkit in the chat. And thanks, Deborah, for that question.
So much to our fabulous presenters and this wonderful team. We have a few minutes. If any of our audience has any questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat. And I want to just make sure we keep this slide for a couple of seconds, if that's okay with the presenters, just to make sure folks can get this information.
Yeah, we'll let you screenshot.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate everyone being here. I saw the chat has been like, you know, people have been sharing and participating in the polls. So that's been exciting. And correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like these conversations, the table conversations, is also about the kitchen table conversations. It also shows about how collaborations can work at so many levels and so many sectors, right? So I feel it takes a village to make those changes, and we appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this space.
Absolutely.
And if I could just make a quick plug, Survivors Know is a new organization we launched just as the pandemic was getting started. So super ideal circumstances, but check out our website, and we'll be holding leadership cohorts in the fall, and would love for you all and your networks to participate. So just wanted to do a little plug. I don't know, Flannery, if you have any legislative highlights or anything you need folks to hop on to as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that most of our legislative work, unfortunately, in 2020 was hindered because of COVID. So we were really excited that we were still able to get 3 laws signed in Indiana, Missouri, and Nebraska during the pandemic, and we're ramping up for 2021. So if anybody wants to get involved, you can go to our website at risenow.us and fill out a form to become a volunteer with us. Yeah, we're hoping to get the ball rolling for 2021 now. It's exciting that we can officially say that after Nebraska passed or Nebraska was signed into law in August, that we are officially at the mark where the majority of states have signed the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights into law. So now states that haven't are actually in the minority, which, that's the first time we've been able to say that, and that feels really great. That's all for me.
There was a question from Sarah from Bold Advocacy. I'm not sure if you answered the question right now. Was what were the laws passed in those states?
Yeah, so we have model legislation that comes from the federal law that was passed unanimously through both houses of Congress and signed by President Obama in October of 2016. It's a whole bunch of laws that probably too much to go into right now, but the top ones are ensuring that the statute of limitations for states to hold on to rape kits and physical evidence be expanded to at least 20 years. When we started, I know, for instance, I'm from New York, and in New York, the statute of limitations allowed law enforcement to destroy evidence after 3 months. So we have gotten New York. Oh yeah.
I thought you were saying 3 years.
Oh, 3 months. Yeah. So New York, we passed in New York, I want to say in 2018. So their statute of limitations is 20 years. We also ensure that rape kits are free to anybody who is a survivor, goes in and has a rape kit done. They will not get charged for their rape kit. A major one is simply being informed of what rights are available to you. And most importantly is that these rights are available to all survivors, whether you decide to proceed through the criminal justice system or not. We want to ensure that all survivors everywhere have the same rights. So our North Star is the motto that justice should not depend on geography. So we're fighting every day to make sure that happens in the United States, and have actually started work internationally as well. So we're working on getting a UN resolution passed, and working in certain countries as well to help them establish either a sexual assault survivors bill of rights or something similar. Yeah, other rights include having access to an advocate throughout the entire process. So even if you show up to a police station and you say, I don't want an advocate right now, you have the option of changing your mind later on and asking for an advocate, and that request will be granted. So yeah, just a brief overview of those rights.
Thank you so much again. And a follow-up question, what is the website to see the Model SA Survivor Bill of Rights?
Yeah, so that's our website, risenow.us. You should be able to see the model legislation. And if you go to risenow.us/COVID, you can also see which states have passed our laws, and click the state and it'll take you to that actual bill. Yeah. So.
Thank you again for the presenters, for being, for sharing your insights, your expertise, your stories. We appreciate everything that you have shared today, and especially with the resources. We will make sure that we can, I know your sites do also have some of the resources, but I'll make sure if there's any resources that came up and you're shared on the chat, that also can be added to your NSAC website session on that landing page. But I also wanted to thank everyone for joining us. The recording will be available on our website soon, nationalsexualassaultconference.org, and you can go under this session, and then you should be able to see the recording, and we will be uploading the slides and any resources that we have identified. Please follow us on social media and share the bold moves you will be making, right? And more importantly, we hope to see you all next year in Anaheim, California, fingers crossed. But either ways, we will make sure we get to see all of us, connect, reconnect, network. These are the spaces that we are very honored to host and hold it for you. So thank you once again, everyone, for being here.